Okay, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock. It's 12 o'clock somewhere. Tuesday, April 9th. This is the Board of Commissioners work session agenda. and we're just going to jump right into it. Upcoming first off the bat is Andrew Doremus is here to apply for the Airport Advisory Board for his interview. And we've got Francie and Steve are both online. The rest of the board's in the room. Welcome, Andrew and Charlotte. Take it away, Charlotte. Who is this guy?
Who is this guy?
Andrew Doremus is here to
He's back.
interview for the Airport Advisory Board. We have a renewal regular position, and then which Valerie has reapplied for, and then we have the alternate position. So I will let you all, we have one more applicant next week, Bill Landis, on the 16th of April. And then that will wrap up all of the interviews for this position. And I'll let you all take it away.
Excellent, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Yeah, welcome. Is your light on just in case the red light? Push that button.
It looks on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're good.
So we're all good.
Thanks for applying. One, we know you were on the board before and had to resign for some reason. And then, tell us your history in the community as an interested citizen, and then also with the board, and maybe a little bit about why you want to jump back on.
Well, I'll have to give you the Reader's Digest version, because if I gave you my history, it starts back in '57 when I was born here. So Steve's laughing. So born and raised here, raised my family here. My wife's from here. We raised 5 boys in the community. I've been on numerous boards as president of the ski club. I was on the Hall of Fame board, just to name a few. And I've always felt it's important to give back to the community. And in the time before when I applied, I had to recuse myself because I got hired by Signature, who was in the RFP process, and I didn't want any conflict. And just for your information, that's over. I don't work for them anymore, and we don't know where that is going. So I saw the opening, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to bring my aviation and community experience back to you guys. Community-wise, this is my home, and I love it. And I've been flying out of the airport since 1977. Commercially, privately, for the airlines. I'm probably one of the few people that's flown everything from a glider to a 4-engine commercial jet in and out of Aspen. And the big thing that we need to focus on, it concerns me, that everybody's issues are clouded, but we need to focus on the safety. I have personally sat at the end of the runway in an airliner and watched an airplane land on the dirt to the west side of the runway. And we are so fortunate we haven't had more tragedies. And we're at a breaking point now with the community and the misunderstanding and misinformation. We need to focus on make it safer. I mean, it's just undeniably safer if the runway's wider. I've been reading about Amory, and he's talking about what bigger airplanes than this. And I think the confusion is we're not building it for bigger airplanes. The FAA wants, their concern is safety. If you read his last editorial, he talks about the airlines are going to bring in the Embraer 145s, and they're not as big, and they're not this. Well, that'd be great. I think that's a good solution. But let's do it on a 150-foot wide runway where the safety meets the FAA requirements. If I can help with the advisory board, guide them with my aviation background, I ran a full-service FBO in Rifle for, 12 years. Sold it to Atlantic. So timing was good, and then at the airport, I'm on the Flight Academy board right now as the chief pilot with the instructors, helping the youth learn how to fly. So I'm out there, not daily, but a couple times a week, and I see what goes on, and I understand it intimately. I've been involved in the airport master plan back in, Patty, you have to help me, that was maybe 2005, and we had to do a master plan before we could do an airport layout plan to submit to the FAA, which was approved. Oh God, we spent 6, 7 years on it, and then it got approved and moved forward, and then we've regressed, and now we're where we are. And there's, no plan is perfect, right? But we have to do something. We know the condition of the runway. We know the airplanes are going to keep coming. And the other, the facts are the bigger, more, the corporate jets and this, everybody's worried about that. I know it's a concern. But it's what makes our community tick. It has for 40 years. These people who we sort of shake our hand at and say, they bring in their big jets. They do, because they can. But they also support a lot of what we enjoy. The music, the arts, the things that we could not sustain without them. One of the interesting things we need to think about, if we do make the airport better and we get better airplanes that can fly nonstops, I've personally had clients who I've chartered, and I bring them here in those jets, but they'll come like at Christmas with their family and their dog. And the owners, when they have business trips, if they can go nonstop, they go on the airlines. It's more convenient, it's just them, and it's simple, and it does happen. And I think we could, some kind in a sort of a weird way, eliminate some of these corporate jet travels by providing better airline direct service. I mean, they don't want to spend the extra money unless they need to, because time is their enemy. And if it's efficient, Aspen to Chicago to LA to Dallas, these direct flights, these folks that have their own jets, they fly on those airplanes, even though we don't think they do. So, the bigger picture is we've got to move to the direction to make it safer, more sustainable. The new airplanes, it's factually proven they're safer, they're more efficient, and there's new approaches coming. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that, but the airplanes that we have now don't have the avionics that are capable of doing that, and the airlines are not going to pay the exorbitant amount to upgrade the older airplane to fly the new approach. The new approach is safer, and that's sort of my whole mantra. If I get on this advisory board, as I was picked before by everybody, that'd be my goal. Right. I'm not trying to make it better for A or B. Safer for all is the goal.
Thanks, Andrew.
Questions?
One question I had was, it occurred to me that I probably flew with you several times without knowing it between 1977 and in all those, the BA 146s and
and the Convairs.
Yeah, did you ever fly the Twin Otters or the?
No,
you didn't go that far back.
I got on when Aspen was flying the Convair 580s.
Did you fly a Convair?
Yeah.
Oh my!
I
See,
flew
now
the Convair
I have
580s
much greater regard now.
For 3 years. Yeah, it was a beast.
Yeah, I'll say.
But
no JADO assist on yours, though, right?
We had water assist, yeah.
Oh, I don't even know about that. I want to open this up to questions. I'll start with Patty.
Andrew, thank you.
Sure.
And I do want to clarify when you said appointed by all. Andrew was our unanimous appointment to the AAB the first go-around. And we were saddened that you stepped down, but we totally understood and appreciated your openness and honesty.
Thank you.
By stepping down. And I know that Andrew has followed it in the interim closely.
Yes.
Both in person and following up on the readings, et cetera, et cetera. And as far as the safety, how do you think, when we talk safety at the airport with expanding the runway, do you feel that because it's that separation issue that we would be able to garner, or how do you feel that plays into the safety?
So there's a couple of ways you have to look at it. First off, the FAA has, as you guys all know, have standards for Category D3 airports. 150-foot wide runway, 400 feet separation, centerline to centerline. You've heard this hundreds of times. Practically wise, from the aviator side, you fly all over the country. This airport looks different. You fly into Jackson Hole, Sun Valley, all the other airports that are Category D3s. You expect it to look a certain way when you're flying in either a day or night or whatever. Visually, you see this. You come here, it looks different. So there's something in the back of your mind that you're trying to figure it out while you're doing this. That's one thing. Two, the separation it's for the plan for the worst case scenario. I know Greg and Patty remember, you might not remember, but Merv Griffin had a plane that took off. Our separation was even closer then. Who? All right, you just dated yourself. There you go.
I'm like,
There you go. I like
did she
that.
not
So-
hear him? Or?
None of my youth there.
So he was a daytime TV star,
Touche.
right? So there's the airplane had a directional control problem. Went off the runway through the grass and ran into 2 other airplanes. Luckily, nobody was killed, but the separation was even less then than it is now. If that separation was what we'd like it to be, that airplane just would have gone into the dirt and it wouldn't have been an issue. So that it's like, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It will happen because the amount of traffic we have, the new pilots we have, and and I don't want it to happen. So I think we should do everything we can. Those are sort of the 2 things, different from a pilot's view, and it's just factually to have that safety area is better.
Thank you. I'm going to keep us moving because we're on a time
I'm
schedule.
good.
Who's next? Anybody? Kelly.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just, no, I appreciate all your knowledge absolutely. I'm curious as to what opportunities for us to maybe strengthen our relationships with the airlines exist.
That's a good question.
With who?
So I've been on both sides. I've been on all 3 sides of the fence. I've flown for general aviation, I've flown charter, and I've flown for the airlines. The airlines are very tight-lipped about their business because it's their business, and they don't want to share it with anybody. Their plans, their future, their direction. To make a better relationship with them, I hate to say it, the best way to get to them is through their pocket, is give them a better deal at the airport so they feel more welcome, and you might get more information from them. Otherwise, they're just going to do what they can do legally, and that's pretty much how they approach the game. I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Steve or Francie?
Francie had her hand up.
Francie's
I think.
hands up. Okay, we'll go with Francie first.
Hi, Andrew. Welcome back. It's super nice to see you again.
Thank you.
And you had me totally convinced last time around that you would be an incredible member of the AAB, and you've convinced me once again.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your perspective as well as your experience. I am concerned that the community is trying to be fractious over this. It seems like that's the way they want it to be. So I appreciate people with your experience talking about the safety of our plans to move forward. I don't really have any questions, but I certainly appreciate your coming back and giving it another shot without being an employee of Signature. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you. It's appreciated.
Thanks, Francie. I'm going to go right to Steve.
Yeah, hi Andrew, glad to see you back applying. I have a couple of questions about safety issues that some of them are troubling to members of the public, others, one is troubling to me that I just wanted to get your take on it. The first has to do with when we move the runway 80 feet to the west, that puts it 80 feet closer to Shale Bluff Hill, which has already been studied by the FAA. It's totally safe to fly in. To me, it's not an issue, but I think it's more a mental thing in people's minds that probably hearkening back to the day when the private plane totally missed the approach. They ran into the gully over on the side of Shale Bluff. They weren't anywhere near the runway. They were just totally in the wrong place during a snow squall. So that would be one question. What's your take on
On that? Well,
Shale Bluff and distance to the runway?
all right, so first, just to clarify the Gulfstream that crashed, it had nothing to do with where the runway was or the approach. It had to do with the poor management that the crew had. And the reason they crashed was they had misjudged Snowmass Brush Creek Road for the runway, and then they saw the actual runway out to the left at the last minute. And I don't know if you were aware, but the wheels were actually in the airplane. They were trying to leave, and the wing caught the ground, and that's why they ran into the gully. It wasn't like, you sort of imagine flying into the mountain. No, it was they were trying to leave, one. But I understand your question, and it's been studied, and from what I've been told and from what I see personally, shifting the runway, the perception is, yes, it's closer to the hill. You can't deny that. However, as you get closer to the runway, I'm sure if you guys are aware of this, Shale Bluffs moves away from the airport. So as you get closer to the arrival end of the runway, the Shale Bluffs is not an issue because it has moved farther away. And on the approach, the highest point doesn't really change by the 80 feet that you move the airplane. Doesn't affect the flight path. It's not any closer than it is now because of where the path is of the airplane. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, you don't have to convince me, that's my feeling too, but I want to hear from someone who's flown in on commercial planes and private planes many times. I just want to hear it again for the public's benefit.
Correct. Well, so maybe a perspective is, you look at the airplanes that are out there, it's about half the width of the airplane that you're shifting. We're not moving half a mile. And it's a very small amount, and the FAA has extreme safety models and these upside-down triangles they've put out. So if they feel it's safe, I mean, there's other airports that are not a lot, but there are other airports that have issues like this. And the approach we have and the new one that's coming is going to be wonderful.
Yeah, and actually the new runway would overlap the existing runway quite a bit with the
width, yes.
50 feet width up to.
Yes,
My
yes.
second question has to do with the barriers at the end that were requested by the safety committee. At the end of each end of the runway to stop a plane as it runs off the end of the runway. To me, those seem to me like those could be a potential obstacle for a plane landing if they come up a little bit short of the runway on their approach for whatever reason. And they might run into those things on their landing unintentionally. I just wanted to get your take on that. Have you had experience with those kind of safety? They're there for a safety reason, but to me, they might make it more dangerous, actually.
I've never seen them. I've never used them, obviously, but I was at the meeting when it was presented that this is a possibility. And, frankly, I think it's better to not use the money for that. It's extremely expensive for our funds that we would be spending. The FAA is not going to help us with that. I think we should focus on the runway lighting, and that kind of thing, and the striping and the condition of the runway and the keeping it clear. And if a plane goes off the end going south, it's just going to go into the mud and the buildings, and it's not going to hit anything bad. Going north, landing is very rare because they don't have that many landings. It'd be more of an aborted takeoff. And my guess is, worst case scenario, it might make it to the highway someday. But I've never flown into an airport that has those. I think they're terribly expensive and maintenance-wise. And like you said, it could be an issue, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Sure.
Great, thanks, Andrew. We're going to wrap it up here. My final question for you is, clearly you've got strong ideas and opinions about the
Yes.
airport, and I think
Yeah.
they're pretty popular after all that we've been hearing. We don't know where everything's going to go yet. And I'm just wondering, do you feel you're able to look at things objectively when the call comes? Because if you're coming on and you're just pro one direction only, are you gonna have trouble changing your mind on things, or
No, as a matter of fact, my track record states when I was on the vision committee, I was pretty adamant towards 8 or 9 gates for the airport. I agreed to 7. I was also very strong about the runway shifting, but after much discussion, we came up with the new common ground plan and shifting the taxiway. So my track record speaks that, sure, I'm adamant, but yes, I'm willing to change and adjust.
Great answer. Thank you. We've got one more interview after you, and and then we'll be thinking about this in another couple weeks, I guess, and we will get back to you. But thank you for coming in. Thanks for applying. And
Oh, you
it's
bet.
great.
Thanks very much. Good
Yeah,
questions,
very
guys.
informative.
Thanks,
Thank
Amy.
you.
All
Good to see
right,
you.
we'll see you later.
Nice to
Bye.
see you.
Cheers.
See ya.
And I'll talk to you about Rick McLean's artwork later.
Yes, yes.
Oh, I want to hear
I'm
about
working on
that.
it.
Me too.
I want to hear about that.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Okay, we're going to go to future agendas, and I'm going to hand this to John.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think
Charlotte.
we can be pretty quick. Just a reminder that we have a joint P&Z and BoCC meeting scheduled for April 23rd from 4 to 6. We will have Grassroots with us to broadcast and film that,
And I will miss that.
and you will miss that one, yeah.
What are we talking about?
We'll talk about Patty.
No.
I believe we're going to be talking about, I don't have
Okay,
the
I'll watch
agenda
it
for
for
that,
sure
yeah.
now.
I believe we're talking growth management, yep.
I will watch
I'm
it.
getting confirmation from
I will watch it. I will watch it after the fact.
Growth management and updates to the comprehensive plan.
and comp plan, yeah.
Thank
I will watch it when I can't sleep at night.
And then
some kid coverage.
just a note on your agenda, we have April 11th ribbon cutting noted that has been changed with the Mine Springs Withdrawal Center to May 23rd at 3:30.
So I'm sure we'll get
okay.
more updates closer to that date, because
Hoping
right now,
so.
that's a long way away.
Yeah. And that's all I have for future agendas.
That's all you've got. And just remind me when our City of Aspen next joint meeting is.
Well, that's going to be an interesting discussion. My counterpart was out of the country last week, so we still have not connected on
Okay,
They're back now
agenda
from
items.
Australia.
all right. I can circle back with you on that. I had a couple of ideas, and we can see if they float.
And we have prep. I just don't have a whole lot for you. as a
And when's our
result.
prep? Is that?
This afternoon.
Oh, I thought-
In about
how
15
come
minutes.
I thought I saw it earlier, and then
Yeah.
I got lost today. Okay, that's it for future agendas.
Well, unless
Kelly.
there's, yeah.
I guess I'll let the others talk.
Why, thank you. Two things. I would love for us to schedule a time for the Healthy Rivers staff and I to present out on the wild and scenic stakeholder process outcomes.
And we have reached out to
Okay,
Healthy
great.
Rivers on that, yeah.
Great. And then I would propose we schedule a joint meeting with Basalt once they
the
seat
new
their
council?
new council
Great.
Great idea.
at some point. Doesn't have to be soon, but at some point. Thanks.
That's it.
I have,
Good suggestions. Thank you.
so, I'll bring it up now for the discussion on the advisory board, if the board chooses to move it. I need to know so I don't give Greg comments ahead of time. There are discussion on who to appoint, which was scheduled for the 23rd. So if we could move that, Greg, to another, when you do your agenda setting.
We move, is there any reason we couldn't move that second conversation to a date when Patty's here? I think we talked about
Charlotte
it
said
earlier,
we
but.
could, there's no,
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think there's a problem with moving it.
Just seem to do it when we know she's going to be here.
So that would probably be
May.
May 8th, I'm thinking.
I'll be back.
Yep. Okay.
And we'll check calendars before I commit, but I'm pretty sure that's good.
And then I would like to, Greg, I'm gonna look at you on this too, and John. Hopefully we can have a policy discussion on, at some point, I think you're working on it right now, as to occupancy of this building.
Yeah, so we've got,
Working on it?
yeah, we've got some staff recommendations forming, and what we'd like to do though is roll that through all the directors
Okay.
and such,
I just
and
wanna
bring
make
back
sure
a
it's an
recommendation
ongoing,
to the board. But yeah, we are working on
Thank
that,
you.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for me. Steve or Francie, any? Okay, don't see any hands up. All right then, we're ahead of schedule then.
Amazing.
So
Just give us a
thanks
few
for
minutes
that.
and-
So up next is, I see Chris Mangus is here. I think we'll have other guests joining us probably in 6 minutes at 1:30.
Greg, do you want to do open discussions? We just
Yes.
had the one item. I believe a letter was distributed, or you should have one in front of you, which is a request to DOLA to extend our middle mile broadband grant, I believe to the fourth quarter, actually. Do I have it?
From July 31st to the next quarter.
Yeah, to September 30th, 2024. It's documentation that DOLA needs to extend that grant, and it needs to be signed by the chair.
Got it. And Charlotte left us hard copies in the room. I don't know if you've been emailed copies to Steve or Francie. I would certainly approve this.
Yeah, the letter's fine. It's a logistical issue, so I don't think.
Do
there's
they
a
have it?
problem.
I don't know if you have it. Do you have it? You've seen it?
I hadn't seen it, but I'm familiar with the issue because there's state legislation running around that same kind of a thing. I would approve extending our grant from them. We might not be able to get any grants in the future, but let's use the one we have the best we can.
Right. I think the first paragraph explains it. It's that Pitkin County is requesting an adjustment of funds for grants, the EIAF B005. In addition, we'd like to extend the contract to the third quarter of 2024. The contract now is set to expire July 31st. We'd like an extension to a new expiration date of September 30th, 2024.
I'm okay with that.
So I can sign that. Thank you. I will take that as a thumbs up from everyone, and we'll sign it for Charlotte. I think Charlotte hears us. Other open discussion? I just wanted to say, yesterday, I thought my testimony was at 10:30 in the morning for the House Bill 1379, which is the dredge and fill legislation. It turns out it was later in the day, so I logged on at 1:30, and I think I testified around 4, and the meeting went till 9, but it did pass. I think 9 to 4, something like
Is this
that.
the McCluskey bill?
This is Julie McCluskey, yeah.
Yeah, her version.
And so that bill has moved on, and what that does is give us more, the state more authority over waters that were abdicated in the Supreme Court decision, Sackett versus the EPA, which basically took away a lot of the ability to regulate dredge and fill, other sort of extractive or damaging operations on waters. So Colorado is going to be taking care of our own water, it looks like. And it's good because the new rule didn't include wetlands and other things that we consider, if we have an ephemeral or intermittent stream, it didn't include those, I believe. So we're expanding it to make sure that our water resources are protected.
And what happened with Kirkmeyer's? The House version,
I'm
right?
not sure I think that was, it didn't sound positive. It sounded like it wasn't going to happen. Steve has a question.
Well, about a different.
Oh, go ahead.
Open
That was all I
discussion
had.
But Levi's here. Does Levi have a status
Oh,
on
Levi could
Kirkmeyer's?
give us the update.
Yeah, the Senate bill has.
Come on up.
You
You gotta
come
come up.
Come to a mic, Levi.
Sorry, Steve, we're gonna invite Levi up.
Introduce
I didn't
yourself.
see you back
Sorry, I
there.
didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah,
but-
no, I'm glad you said that. Levi will actually give us the straight skinny on this whole thing.
I guess 2 points I would add. I don't think the Senate bill has gone to committee yet. And reference the House Bill 1379 we're putting together, the requested letter. So hopefully water quality and quantity can sign on as well as you all if you
Right,
wanna
so we'll
offer
have a letter to sign.
more support.
And the board has already agreed to that, I believe.
Yeah,
The Kirkmeyer bill is scheduled for Thursday in committee.
Got it.
thank you.
Thanks.
No
Thanks
update
for
yet.
that. Glad you were
Yeah,
here.
maybe it
Back
did.
me up.
PI, but not yet.
Yeah, the testimony went great, and you're right, it went pretty late last
Was there
night, but
70 or 80 people testifying? Something like that.
I lost count of
Yeah.
how many different panels they called.
Right.
But it wasn't too inflammatory aside from a few pot shots at the Supreme Court and some firebacks, but it was pretty awesome
Glad to
Really,
hear.
U.S. Supreme Court?
So they were all being polite. That's good.
for the most part.
Okay, well, thank you. Steve, do you have your open discussion?
Yeah, this issue has been brought up before by the same citizen to me, and that is the fact that there's no dumping station for RVs to empty their toilet tank, holding tanks, anywhere in the upper Roaring Fork Valley. And now that it's kind of the RV season again, I ran into her at the senior center and she brought the issue up again. The thought occurred to me that maybe there is a
Thanks,
place,
Levi.
maybe somewhere we could put in a facility at the, kind of by Public Works that would feed into a pipe. The dump station could be at the top of the hill and there could be a pipe going right to the Aspen Sanitation District plant to handle the waste from the, the RVs dumping, and that might be a solution to, providing a facility for the public to use. So I just wanted to throw that idea out. Maybe there's some other better solution somewhere, but I think people used to go to the trailer park facility that the ski company ended up buying down by the KOA. It was called the KOA at one time, but that's privately owned. It's not a public facility there anymore. So it is an issue for people who have RVs with, what do they do with their waste that's in their tanks when they get back home?
Great, thank you,
So I
Steve.
want to put that out there. We don't have to come up with a solution right now, but let's all be thinking about it, and maybe we can come up with a solution.
Thanks, Steve. So John, do we get Brian in to discuss possibilities? And
With the master planning update at the,
Yeah, so we had brought forward a proposal for processing this kind of waste at the landfill, and there are some challenges. It was turned into a pretty expensive prospect, and I believe there were some discussions with the sewer district at that point, so we can maybe dig that back up and bring that back so you can look at those.
Great,
yeah,
thanks.
I've run into her at the golf course every time, because she has an RV. I thought she lived in, but she lives at Centennial. So, because they used to be the Aspen Sand District, you could take it right over here, and then they stopped that. So I don't know if they'll accept it again.
There's some
coming down the hill.
challenges with processing that effluent and new regulations,
little
and that's
more
why
raw
we were looking at developing our own. But
Yeah.
it did run into the millions of dollars.
And I think we'd have traffic input of RVs pulling in and out of Public Works intersection. But I know we're undergoing a master planning process for Public Works, so I think it's probably a good time to have that discussion to see if there's, rather than wait till the master planning's done and then throw this out there, so. Yeah, and I've let her know that the intercept lot's not gonna work because there's no sanitation system there, so. And I think they have to go to South Canyon, and I'm not even sure if South Canyon's gonna continue to take it, so. Yeah, so it's an issue.
Well, we'll
Process.
follow up. Thank you for bringing it up, Steve. I'm going to keep us moving. It's 1:32, and we've got our next conversation up, which I think will be interesting. This is regarding pending energy siting bill through the Colorado legislature, and it's about clean energy siting. And Chris Menges, the Director of Climate Action for the Nature Conservancy, is joining us, as our former Governor Bill Ritter, who's just joined, and Will Tour is the Director of our Colorado Energy Office. And I'd like to just start this by saying that, first of all, I was invited to a conference last fall with Governor Ritter on this topic, and my concern and reason for going was that I see this clean energy siting becoming a conflict as the grid grows between environmentalists and environmentalists. And we've got renewable energy advocates in conflict with conservationists and environmentalists. And it occurred to me that this is something we'd like to be out in front. And so I'm grateful that both of you have agreed to join, and that Chris is here to help us. Kelly made the suggestion last week that we do this, and it all fell together. So I think this is the beginning of a conversation. No decisions imminent, but this is an important conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Chris now, and he can
Hi, Chris.
take it away with our guests. And I know Governor Ritter has about 20 minutes max before he'll have to leave. I don't know if Will can stick around, but I'm hoping we have a conversation and we start developing a way forward. And the last thing I'll say is that John Peacock is going to bring up the concerns that the typical county has with, how is our code going to need to change in order to accommodate clean energy without compromising our values. That's an interesting conversation. So go ahead, Chris.
Thanks so much. Yeah, super interesting conversation, and I think the one we look forward to having with you all. So with the three guests here, we were going to start out with Governor Ritter to just provide a quick overview, then hand it over to Director Tour to speak a little bit about kind of what's been happening and what we think might be in the package that we might see this week, and then I'll share a little bit of perspective on relevance to Pitt County. I'll say briefly, based on my understanding, John, I think what you've seen is a negotiation draft
Correct.
from late January. And our understanding is that substance has shifted quite a bit. So we might address some of that during these remarks, but we're also aware that there isn't necessarily like a bill to discuss until there's a bill to discuss. So it's a little bit of conjecture, but appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. So Governor Ritter, I'll kick it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And I just finished having lunch with one of my former cabinet members, Harris Sherman, who said to tell Commissioner Clapper alone.
Thank you. Yeah, Harris follows me around. I don't know how he keeps track, but he keeps track of me better than I keep track of me. So thank you. Appreciate that.
He said to say hello. It was really nice. And thank you to the entire commission, to everybody who's here for this conversation. I will take a brief amount of time just to say siting has become an important issue in many places around the country. And partly there is a greater organized opposition to renewable energy and utility scale kind of renewables. Hard to say exactly where that is necessarily coming from, but we've seen counties throughout states in the Midwest, some in the West, put in place moratoria that don't allow a county to wind up under its authority to permit utility scale renewables and storage. So partly the response to that has been that states have put in place legislation that either gives the state backstop authority, gives the state coexisting authority, or gives the state the only authority to actually be involved in siting of renewables. The reason this is important is because the United States has a target that it wants to hit in terms of emissions reduction. The power sector plays a very significant role in the United States hitting particularly its 2030 target. And just to think about this nationally, we would have to triple the rate at which we're building renewable energy projects between now and 2030, and then we'd have to probably triple it again between 2030 and 2050. So those are pretty staggering numbers to think about what's necessary for the power sector to play its role in reducing emissions. So a group of environmental NGOs came together and wanted to talk about siting, but have a statewide conversation. I am at Colorado State University. I run the Center for the New Energy Economy and have since I left office. So they enlisted me to be the stakeholder facilitator. So we did several meetings with stakeholders, including with county commissioners. We had a variety of different stakeholders: the energy producers, the utilities, trade unions, tribes, environmental justice groups, and county commissioners. And did different meetings with different types of county commissioners. There was kind of the mountain group and the Eastern Colorado group, and tried to mine those conversations for what the concerns were, what the opportunities might be for us as a state to move forward with siting legislation. Wound up in what we'd call a seminar at the very end of the process, where we had a couple days and had very robust conversations about what different stakeholders may or may not be able to live with. One of the things that we heard from county commissioners that I suggest is still true is that the 1041 process is very important to counties. Their authority to be able to site infrastructure, to decide what projects do and don't get built under that authority is still extremely important to them, and they did not want that eroded. However, as we talked about sort of the 5 or 6 counties that had either a moratorium in place or were looking at lifting a moratorium, putting one in place. There were several counties that were in the process in different places. They did agree that some backstop authority from the state would be helpful, and the whole time we were doing this, we were talking to the county commissioners, but also we were talking to the governor's office, to Will Tour, and to the people in Will Tour's office at the Colorado Energy office. And so we got a pretty good sense from, I think, the county commissioners at the time about what they might be able to live with, but also about the scarcity of resources in many of the counties that were involved in permitting. The day we did the first meeting of the Eastern Colorado County Commissioners, Logan County had a request for a permit come in the door for a 15,000 acre solar farm. And, you know, they had they did not have a lot of resources, human resources, to commit to that. And so we talked a lot about that problem as it related to counties and to county staffing and the resourcing for that, but also, you know, about this tension that exists between the 1041 jurisdiction and the need to ensure that we as a state are doing our part in emissions reduction, the power sector is doing its part, and that's going to come in part from utility scale solar, utility scale wind, utility scale storage, all of which can require land mass. Like Chris said, there's a draft now that looks like a bill that could be passed, but it, I think, largely keeps in place the 1041 authority. It also gives the Department of Parks, or the Division of Parks and Wildlife, some authority in outlining habitat that should not be built upon. And, you know, and then there's, as Pitkin County knows, there's issues around permitting on federal land that are quite significant, where both renewable infrastructure and transmission are concerned. So the process that we had ended in October, November. There have been negotiations between the Coalition of Environmental NGOs. Chris has been a part of that, as has Will. And so I'll give it over to Will to describe sort of where we currently are. But we did the groundwork, we felt, around the state to try as best as possible to resolve some of the natural tensions that are going to take place when you're talking about land use policy, and particularly land use policy that at the end of the day can very much help us with our emissions reduction that we targeted in Colorado. Will?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Will Torr, the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office. It's great to be able to join you today for this conversation. As a former county commissioner, I always enjoy being able to meet with counties. And you know, I think that Governor Ritter did a very good job of sort of setting the context. And maybe just to say a little bit more about the Colorado context. And as I think you're very aware, the legislature has adopted economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals for the state, cutting emissions in half below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And as the administration over the last 5 years has moved towards implementing those goals through our strategic greenhouse gas roadmap, one of the things that has become very clear is that electricity really plays a central role in being able to achieve our climate goals. That while there are other things that we need to do, the largest emissions reductions really will come from the combination of moving towards close to zero carbon electricity generation, and then doing widespread electrification in transportation, in buildings, and in industrial applications. And you know, we're currently on a pathway towards about an 84 to 85% reduction in GHG emissions from electricity generation by 2030, really driven by clean energy plans adopted by our major utilities, all of which will be retiring all of the coal generation in the state, you know, no later than the end of 2030, and essentially replacing that generation with wind, solar, and battery storage, while keeping the existing network of gas plants essentially to help provide capacity and grid stability. The Energy Office recently worked with Ascend Analytics to model out the pathway to 2040, where we asked our consultants to look at likely 2040 electric demand, given our goals and programs that are in place around electrification of transportation and buildings, projecting about a 40% increase in electric load statewide by 2040, and then looking at what it'll take to meet that load. And what that analysis shows is that we are going to need to add significant amounts of wind and solar, that essentially the lowest cost pathway to meeting 2040 projected electric demand involves pretty much tripling wind in the state and quintupling the amount of solar deployment. So we've got a lot of renewables to build over the next 20 years. And so, you know, I think from the state perspective, we are very interested in making sure that we have a sort of permitting regime that is both able to sort of address the legitimate land use issues that need to be addressed as this renewable capacity gets cited, but also to ensure that there are reasonable pathways to allow deployment of renewables at the scale that is going to be needed in order to preserve our climate. And, you know, I would say that to date, I don't think we've had giant problems with permitting in Colorado. I think there are many other states where we have seen really significant conflicts and sort of really significant obstacles to renewables deployment. So far, while there have been some localized conflicts, overall, I think that the system in Colorado has been working pretty well. But that said, again, we're looking at significant expansion of renewables and have been sort of watching and seeing what's been happening in many other states. Whereas Governor Ritter noted, there's what seems to be a well-organized and sort of well-funded effort to sort of oppose renewable deployment in many places around the country. And certainly there's the possibility of that type of effort expanding in Colorado. So we've been, you know, part of a series of discussions over really the last 9 months or so, sort of exploring this issue and thinking about how to address it. There was an earlier concept that I think that you have seen that would have proposed legislation that would have essentially set a series of criteria at the state level that counties would have been required to incorporate into their land use code for review of renewables projects. Where the conversation, I think, is headed now, and if there is legislation that comes forward this year, I think it will likely reflect kind of a narrower approach that would focus more on a few areas. I think one would be providing technical support to counties, likely through the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, to counties that requested either for developing codes or for reviewing projects. Likely would look at compiling examples of codes that seem to be working well across the state and making those available, and doing some sort of study over a period of time of how well the current system is working across the state to try to really get a better understanding of, you know, where this is working well, where it may not be working well, and bring that back before there's consideration of further changes. I think there would likely also be sort of much lighter touch in terms of any direction on county renewable, how counties would need to treat renewables in their land use code, likely looking at some issues such as sort of the timeline for considering permit applications, but not looking at an overly prescriptive approach. And as Governor Ritter stated, I think we would likely be looking at some level of consultation between developers and Colorado Parks and Wildlife within high priority habitat areas. I think again, I don't know exactly what legislation may look like, but certainly that's where sort of the thinking of the Energy Office has evolved over the last several months as we've had conversations with multiple stakeholders.
Thank you, Director Tour. If I could, this is Greg Poshman. If I could, I'd like to just ask both of you or Governor Ritter to start, because I know you've only got about 5 minutes left, to talk a little bit about NEPA. Whenever I've talked in conversations with the feds, whether it's the FAA or the FTA or some of the other agencies, it's pretty clear to me that they're not going to reach their renewable energy goals. They're not going to reach their climate goals. And in some cases, it doesn't seem like they even have a plan. And I also heard at our conference that the NEPA rules often get in the way. And what can you just share your perspective on that? So it's reaching beyond the state borders in that case, but we have a lot of federal land in our county.
Yeah, so Will, can I go ahead? I'm going to have to join another call at 2. So this actually came up during, if you recall, the Clean Power Plan that was first proposed during the Obama administration by the EPA, and I was a coordinator in that case of conversations with all the governor's offices in the West. We facilitated those conversations with the governor's office. We then included utility commissioners and other stakeholders, including utilities. But it's not, in that case, it wasn't so much about siting of renewables, it was about siting of transmission. And there was a real desire on the part of everybody to look at processes we have in place, including the NEPA process for permitting. And there have been a lot of discussions about permitting reform. You have places in the West, let's take the state of Idaho, where it took 13 years in the state of Idaho to build a transmission line. The reason it did is because Idaho is about 66% federal lands. Nevada's 85% federal lands, Colorado's about 45. And so NEPA is part of this whole question about how you can streamline this without losing the environmental scrutiny that you have on projects like that might include the Endangered Species Act, the Endangered Species List, but other kinds of concerns around habitat, migration patterns, and wildlife. And so, so that conversation is not a Colorado conversation. It's a national one, and it's a national one that the governors still want to participate in, want to be a part of. I just had a conversation with Senator Bennett on Sunday night, and I think, there's ambition inside the United States Senate to try and streamline the reform and try and not lose anything in the process. So that's what I will tell you. It's a federal statute that would have to be passed in order to modify NEPA, and they're trying to understand how to do that with bipartisan support as we speak.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, Chris, I think I'm going to turn it back to you, unless, Will, you wanted to add in, but I wanted to bring it back to Chris, who has he's going to try and bring it back to Pitkin County for us.
Sure. Well, thank you both, and thanks, commissioners, for having us here today. You know me, I'm Chris Menges. I'm the Climate Program Director for the Nature Conservancy Colorado. Formerly worked with the City of Aspen for 8 years in climate sustainability programs. So that's where some of my frame of reference for kind of the connection between the state discussion and local context comes from. I'll quickly note that the Nature Conservancy's mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends, and we work in 74 countries and all 50 states. And because that's our mission, one of the things that we're really focused on is the renewable energy transition, helping make it possible, and helping make it possible in a way that centers climate conservation and community outcomes. So what we know from working in all of these localities is that communities do need to self-determine and self-govern. We're also aware that the conservation gains that we've made and continue to make over many years aren't things that many of our voters want us to lose as we build all of this infrastructure that we need. And then, of course, we recognize that achieving our climate goals is an important foundational component to healthy communities and healthy lands and waters. Governor Ritter mentioned that we've been working on this for, I think we've been working on this for the past year and a half. And the approach we've taken is heavily based on engagement, as Governor Ritter was describing, but also science that TNC has conducted, which shows that doing these things together is possible on paper. So we've actually modeled the footprint that's necessary, and we see that achieving 100% clean goals and a net zero economy is actually possible without impacts to high value natural and working lands. And then we've also polled voters in Colorado, and they overwhelmingly support this transition, but they also have a number of values that are important to them in how it lands. And one of those top values, out of a set of 10, could share more later if that was of interest, but one of the top values is really avoiding impacts to wildlife. So, generally, and then we've engaged the 9 different stakeholder groups. Governor Ritter shared some of those findings, but, essentially, what we've learned is that there likely is an approach here that maintains local authority and allows us to achieve our clean energy goals in a low conflict way and in a way where we're less likely to see some of the pushback that we're seeing in other states. And that's really what this is all about. Okay, so why does this matter to Pitkin County? I'm gonna just shift maybe a little bit into a personal perspective because I don't, the Nature Conservancy doesn't have a particular perspective on what Pitkin County should do or how they should see it. So I'm just gonna share how I'm making the connection. So I think for one, Pitkin County and this region have been incredible leaders in the climate space, as you all know. This is a lot of your leadership over the years, currently partner organizations, the City Corps, et cetera. Much of those many of those actions deliver tangible, immediate benefits to citizens. But for us to really harness the actual climate system benefits of that decarbonization, we need to also be part of enabling similar actions on a larger scale, state, national, global. We're all well aware. I think, that is often one of the discussions in this valley is that we can innovate and demonstrate here that will create benefits, and then others will be able to, do similar things. We've helped, create some of those conditions for the rest of the state to move in this direction. And now this particular issue is, getting it right is one that will help create those enabling conditions. So I guess from my perspective, it's in our interest to help guide that conversation and have an outcome that allows others to benefit from the clean energy transition, but also for the county to benefit from some of the groundwork that we've set over the years. Let's see. I also think Pitkin County really has a kind of heritage of both natural resource conservation and management and clean energy leadership and place-based governance through the caucuses that balance multiple priorities, perspectives, and zonings. And this particular issue, the state siting issue, is really an example of that type of thing touching down at the state level. So it would be, as a bill is introduced and moved forward, it would be really helpful to have your review and perspective on that, since you have a lot of experience, balancing those issues, and since balancing those issues is really at the core of, our values here in Pitkin County. a similar thing. I know that Pickens County has ample experience kind of with the complexity of large infrastructure that balances multiple jurisdictions and authorities, and figuring out what infrastructure looks like across jurisdictions in a way that kind of spans past, present, and future values. And again, that kind of thing is really at the heart of this issue. Governor Ritter mentioned some of the Eastern Plains counties earlier. One thing that excites me about this is that we have an opportunity to kind of bridge between some of the counties who have asked for the clean energy transition for many years, so it include us, other CC4CA jurisdictions, and then counties who are going to need to host these 15,000 acre plus clean energy projects and the transmission infrastructure associated with that. In a sense, we are, a demand driver for all of this to happen, but we'll see less of the really large infrastructure built within our borders. We may have some projects, but a large part of it, like the level of projects that will unlock broader climate goals like transportation electrification and building electrification on the state scale, that will happen on the Eastern Plains and in part on the Western Slope. This is a great opportunity, as a county that has asked for this transition, to weigh in productively and ensure that we find a state solution, that works for us, that works for those partner counties, as they're asked to site and permit a lot of this infrastructure. And that's why the legislation, that we expect will contain a lot of resources to support that, and also science-based information on wildlife protection. Let's see, I had a couple other things. I want to make sure we leave time for conversation.
Right, I don't want to run us out of time.
So,
I knew we were going to go over by 15 or 20 minutes.
I'll wrap
We'll
there.
make it up.
We'll be okay. We can make up the time. I want to make sure. I don't know how soon Will needs to leave us. I know the governor had to go. But, thanks, Will. But I'd love to open it up to questions if we have any, and we'll start with Patty and then Kelly.
This is, I'm supportive of this. This is something we based on a small scale with our solar field here at the Intercept lot, but or the Park and Ride, excuse me. But I think it's on a statewide level. It's really not a matter of coming up with language that allows us to compromise. It's more a matter of us blending the natural resources, the environmental issues, the energy issues, et cetera. But being involved with Northwest Cog, and an issue that came up was actually Clear Creek County, the closing of a coal mine, mining activities over there, was the job loss. Mm-hmm. And I know you're facing that. It's kind of on the fringe of the language of a siting bill, but I'm sure that's going to be some opposition that you may hear as far as reaching these goals. And we brought in a bunch of, ahead of time, job retraining opportunities, which help to lessen some of the anxiety of others looking at closing down these coal-fired plants. So I think that needs to be part of the discussion. The other thing, too, was the issue of health risks related, cancers and heart disease related to high-voltage energy transmission lines. I've seen that as a nurse in our local community with some during pregnancy exposure of the mother, and then some heart related disease and heart structure issues. So I think that's something that will help to alleviate some of the fears if that's just part of the conversation moving forward. I'm just trying to troubleshoot ahead of time, but I am supportive of coming up with some language that fits. I understand the NEPA issues and how do you bring the environmentalists in and one political party into that discussion when you're saying, well, we want to kind of skirt NEPA. Well, we really don't, but we don't want it to take 13 years to get us where we need to go. So I think that we ran into that with the Ryan Land Exchange here in Pickens County. How do you do what you need to do, but in a timely manner so you can get done what you need to get done? So, yeah, and I think, can't speak for the rest of my board, but I kind of have a feeling that Pickens County will be reaching out to help move this forward. So thanks. And thank you for being here with us today.
I'm going to say, Will, if you want to chime in, you'll just have to yell or
Yeah,
wave your
thanks, Will.
hand
And I'm going to
vigorously.
call Harris Sherman and thank him too.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, it'd be great to get Harris. Harris' name keeps coming up in my world here, so we're going to see him one of these days. I'm going to go right to Kelly and then Steve.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. This is very informative so far. I would like to understand, I get the big picture. I'm kind of looking to hone in a little bit. I'd love to understand what the stakeholder groups' goals for a permitting regime are. You know, from the most sort of pure perspective. I heard what maybe the compromise position were for a kind of a potential bill to be introduced, but I'd love to know from a real advocate's perspective what your goals for that permitting regime would look like.
Great. Okay.
And I also want to know, Chris was on our growth advisory committee, just in case anyone forgot that. So his knowledge of our code is rich. Okay, sorry.
We recognize that face.
Do you want to chime in, or it's up to you? Yeah, do you want to chime in, Will, or should I hand it to Chris?
I'm happy to say a few things, and just to note at 2:15, I'm going to need to jump, excuse me, for another meeting. But I would say from the State Energy Office perspective, you know, our focus really is on how do we have an approach to siting that will allow us to reach the state climate goals. And so we are sort of very focused on, you know, what is the approach that will make it possible to quintuple solar and triple wind deployment over the next 2 decades, while having appropriate protections in place for communities and habitat.
And I'm happy to take a quick crack at it too. So I think, you know, the original stakeholder process and kind of midwinter set of negotiations were pointing us towards a set of state standards that would, you know, we always, the conversation was always counties will be the permitting authority and permitting entity. But there was an earlier version that anticipated, you know, essentially creating limits on setbacks and a few other important things that we've seen counties around the country kind of use as de facto moratoria. Based on engagement, I think, with CCI, and this, you know, this is Senator Hansen's leadership primarily, but based on that engagement, what we understand to be the current version kind of drops some of those more prescriptive state standards and instead simply leaves in the elements that Director Tour was describing, where it's you know, on request consultation and resourcing, provision of voluntary, you know, of codes that can be used voluntarily just as information. Mm-hmm. And then kind of a science-based data set from CPW that is also essentially provided as a resource. And Commissioner Clapper, you know, it was interesting that you brought up the Pickens County project earlier, because, you know, it's a great example. As we all remember, you know, there was a lot of discussion that this is a wildlife corridor, and you know, certainly neighbors likely see wildlife out there, but did we have a scientific basis, you know, to validate what essentially is an anecdotal claim, you know, if you can apply this to a much bigger picture. So what the legislation would do, you know, is provide kind of science-based information to developers and commissioners so that communities can really make those determinations based on the conservation science, not anecdotes. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what it looks like.
What about timelines? Like, what would the goal be for
other than 13
timelines?
years?
It's so,
Yeah.
In a project approval timeline is sort of one way I'm thinking of, but then I'm also, is this envisioned as like a transitional period? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like, are we thinking about we need stronger codes to make this transition, and then after the transition, you know, it might be a different code
So
environment?
I think there are a few different perspectives on this. Director Tour described the report to the General Assembly. And that report, you know, anticipates describing whether we're running into either, you know, permitting challenges or unreasonable wildlife impacts. So, you know, part of the discussion that's occurring right now is like things are fine. We don't need requirements. So the report to the General Assembly is an opportunity to say, let's validate that. If we validate that and we're not seeing problems, we don't have to do anything else. If we are seeing, you know, significant problems, then we have empirical data to have a follow-up conversation. Director Tour, that's how I'm seeing it. How about you?
You know, I think that describes the current concept pretty well. I'm not sure that we are looking at something that would require major changes to county land use codes in the near term, although there may be a few relatively light touch elements around things, as I mentioned, such as timelines for project review. And I don't know exactly what the language is going to look like. Hopefully there will be a language to review in the near future. But I do think that the structure is more one of trying to make sure that we really have good information on what's working and what isn't working, and is there a problem that needs to be fixed before looking at a sort of more prescriptive legislative approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I hand it over to Steve Child and then Francie?
Thank you.
And Steve, I know Will's going to have to leave in about 5 minutes, so we're
Yeah,
just...
I realize.
Yeah.
I was involved with power line projects in eastern Colorado at one time. And when the Pete's wind farm was built, a power line was put through to the power plant, the coal plant in Brush, where the Xcel had their control station for all of the, you know, the coal energy, the natural gas, and the wind power. Well, the people along that power line, they got paid some money for the power line going through their property, but then that was it. The Pete's wind farm could not have been built without having that power line going through all of these people's, all these different farmers' land, all the way from Pete's to Brush. And I really felt bad for the people there. And we at that time had developed a concept that when there is a wind farm put in somewhere and necessitates a long power line going to get onto the grid, that every landowner along the way that the power line goes through their property is an essential part of that project, and they should get part of the income from that project on an ongoing basis, like an annual royalty for the amount of electricity that's going through their land. If it weren't for their land, the project wouldn't be viable. And so I think that's the same reason why there's a lot of communities, especially out in a lot of eastern Colorado, they're reluctant to have some outside company come in and want to put in a big project like thousands of acres of solar farm or another wind farm. And the local people who live there and have to live with it forever don't get any compensation for that. So there's a resistance to having, you know, outside entities come in and want to do these projects. If the local people had ownership in that project, if they would get an annual royalty of, it doesn't have to even be a whole lot, but that's almost a recognition that they're suffering from the consequences of this project. They should get some compensation for it. Whether it be a power line going through their place or if your neighbor has a whole bunch of wind turbines that are sometimes very close to the neighbor's house, the neighbor gets no compensation for that. They should be getting a part of the income from that wind turbine that is there 24 hours a day bothering them and changing their lives forever. Their neighbor might be getting handsome income off of it, but the person without the wind turbine on their own property is not getting anything.
Thanks, Steve.
So I think this,
Steve,
yeah.
I want to
okay,
hand this
so-
to Will because he's going to have to go. If you've got a response to that, Will, if you've got time, and thank you.
Okay, I mean, I could do sort of 60-second response. So certainly, there are cases where renewable developers and local governments have negotiated community benefits agreements where there is some sort of investment that is providing additional benefits to the community beyond, the economic development benefits that come from the leases of directly participating landowners and the property tax revenues to the county. I would say, I think what we've seen is that there's a wide variety of attitudes towards these projects. There are certainly counties that actually view them as very beneficial to their economy and as sort of key sources of property tax revenue. So I don't think that there is anything approaching sort of a universal opposition to the projects, but certainly it varies from location to location. But with that, I am going to need to drop for my next meeting, and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you for joining us. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye.
Okay, Francie, I'm sorry that we saved you for last, but Chris is still
No
with us
worries.
and John's here.
I had a question for Will, actually, about the susceptibility of the energy department if we change administrations in the state, but that's okay. No worries.
Anything else? I'm going to shift this to, John, certainly,
Sure.
John was probably most alarmed when we set this thing up, only because he knows what the questions are going to be and what the issues are. And if you could talk a little bit about how you see this affecting our code, and as we talk about revising codes and plans.
Sure. Well, and as Chris had said, I think there's been a lot of evolution in this conversation, especially over the last 24 hours, I think. And so we've had a chance to see some of the compromises that the different interests have been working on. And so there's a lot of good in this. And just big picture, I think from staff's perspective, the goals and big picture that have been outlined for you today, I think broadly align with, this board's goals overall. And so it's really in the details. And Chris, thank you for all your time on our growth committee. We're working through that. And as you know, energy siting was one of the recommendations that was brought forward through that process, and also your recognition based on your many experiences in our community of the competing values that always come to the table when considering these things. So as legislation moves forward now, if it's based on the compromises, my blood pressure went down a lot when I saw the compromises, so thank you. I think there's a lot of good work with the model codes that would be coming forward. I think that's going to be an important resource, and the technical support for counties, especially those that don't have as deep a bench, right, to work with. I think one of the things that this board is still going to have to consider as legislation is proposed is around those 1041 regulations still. And I think this is still an area of conversation, but there's that balance point of being able to move projects forward that achieve your goals, but also allow you enough time and due process to balance the different interests. And so what we're seeing right now is a 120-day timeline for those solar projects of 5 megawatts or are larger, and I think it's like 500 kilowatts of wind or higher. I'm sure those may shift a little bit. And just reflecting back on our our most recent review of a 5 megawatt solar, whether that would have been enough time, right, to run through the public process and balance those competing values in the community. It's not clear to us right now because there's really not specific legislation, I think, yet. What happens on day 121 if we're in the middle of a public process? Is it like a locations and extent where we've got that time, and if we haven't made a decision, it's approved, or what is that? I think those are some of the details to track and talk about and think about. Is 120 days or 240 days? But I think staff's concerns are going to be more in that process piece and ensuring that we protect the ability for you to have conversations and decision-making around areas of local concern while also supporting legislation that meets these broader climate goals. But a lot of good work was done, I think, in the compromise. So, Greg, when I was communicating with you, I think it was 48 hours ago, and within 24 hours, a lot changed. And so I appreciate that work too. But there are going to be still some concerns as you give up some local control or have those timelines. Think about how much time you would need in this community to balance those interests and have those conversations. I think that's going to be the big sticking point.
I think the reason I wanted to have this conversation was that it occurs to me that if we can't make it work here, it's going to be pretty hard to do it anywhere. This community has always been pushing us to be out in front on issues like this. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to learn as much as we can as we go into this, because it's becoming of national concern. I wanted to draw everybody's attention, certainly the viewers, if anybody's watching. There's an April 6th opinion piece in the Washington Post, and the headline is "Environmentalism Could Stop the Clean Energy Transition." And it's already bringing up examples of where, it's a fear-based process where people are so concerned about what could possibly happen that they just shut it down altogether. I think we could probably we could probably help with informing the public and then perhaps leading on it along with our other communities that are thinking the same way. And so that I really appreciate everybody doing this. Chris, is there anything else you want to share with us?
Sure. Well, I'll say briefly to John's comment, I really appreciate that. Appreciate your review. When we're talking about things like those timelines, I think that is one place where, there's a great opportunity for you all to weigh in and help the proposal get it right. And also there is like anticipatory negotiation, of course, like baked into legislation. Kind of as a, for your information, like as an insider's look at this, one of the really interesting dynamics is that as we've shifted this a little bit more away from state standards that provide developers the amount of certainty that they would like, they've become more concerned that there's less in this for them. And that's part of it's just a natural balance. Like as we tilt more towards community interests and control, developers, lose something. It's been, my life over the past 6 months has been keeping this on the rails with all of the different parties. And that's an example of that push and pull. And I just mentioned that to say, that as we move more towards certain directions, it's just going to be really valuable to have, kind of the topically focused, clear-eyed engagement of what's actually in this thing, rather than, just kind of a narrative that, you might be hearing from somewhere based on a previous version. to help move it forward in a productive way.
Do you have a question?
Well, I guess, an idea to float, in reflecting on this conversation, I really think about this as like, we're in a transition, right? Like we're in like a moonshot kind of goal trajectory. And, does it make sense to think about timing, in that circumstance differently than we would like timing in just sort of an ordinary code process? And I just wonder if there's, as model codes get developed, like if there are timelines and standards that can address kind of straightforward, low-hanging fruit type stuff versus some of the more complicated type stuff. Like if we can have a project that meets certain conditions, like it should deserve a faster timeline than projects that don't meet certain conditions. I don't know. That's just a sort of a more detailed look than we're getting into, but that is what I would think about when I would look at how codes might be developed and like whatever role there is for counties to help in the development of that code, I think would be useful too.
That's a fantastic idea, and I think something we're thinking about as well. One nuanced detail on kind of providing a model code as a resource is that, so what I'm hearing secondhand from CCI is that they're concerned about a model code, like a recommended code existing, because the fear is that eventually local governments will be compelled to adopt that. That is not actually what we're anticipating. Having worked in local government on these type of issues, benchmarking ordinances, et cetera, like I know that having a adaptable, kind of like more perfected model code is much more helpful, especially, if you don't have a ton of staff resources. It's much more helpful than just like a scatter shot of examples from peers that, while they may be helpful, it requires a fair amount of sifting through to, figure out like, does this actually help us or not? So I guess I'm hopeful, like this would be almost kind of like another request of this board. Could we help colleagues see that the provision of a model code would simply be a resource, not a threat, and an opportunity for local governments to work with the agencies that would be tasked with putting this together to do some of the really cool things that you're describing. And again, then that would be a resource that local governments could then decide whether or not was a fit for them.
Great. I'm going to go to Patty.
Yeah, real quick. So what you're saying is
John, I think.
people are fearful that it's going to be a restrictive code rather than a flexible code that gives them some parameters and guidelines. It doesn't say you do X, you can't look at Y and Z.
I think the fear that I'm hearing is if we put anything together, we're going to come back in a future year and require them to adopt it as written, which is not the intent. The intent of developing a model code would simply be to do a little bit of legwork to provide a better resource than just a compilation of other codes.
Thank you.
I'd like to have John, you wanted to weigh in, I think.
Well, I don't need to go ahead. I think this is probably a reaction, and this may be for Director Tor, to the proposed legislation that maybe hasn't been as friendly to local control in other areas, particularly housing, affordable housing, and such. That
The lack of trust in government.
that CCI is probably responding to, and so it would be helpful to have a narrative from the state, I think, around that to build that trust back.
It might be helpful for us to initiate on this because it seems like we're willing to dive in. So I'd support that. I don't know what the lift would be, but I certainly would support moving that forward, and perhaps communities could use our model. I'm ready to stop. Anybody else? We got.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you all so
Chris,
much.
Thanks
I
for.
could talk more about this.
I know
but,
there's a
you
lot
know.
more to it, but this is a
Nice
good
to
start.
see you.
Yeah, you too. And happy to come back when this is introduced. Bring any info that might be helpful.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Chris. Thanks for
I have a
coming in.
feeling we'll
Please
be talking much sooner than
ex-
that. so-
extend our
I'm
thanks to
going
the.
to link this presentation to some of the counties in the CCAP membership to, who I think maybe
Great.
aren't super informed.
Great idea.
And please thank the governor and Will Tour for us. I know you're in touch with them all the time. So,
CC4CA too.
yep.
I think Chris is on.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, yes.
Okay, where are we now? We are talking about a discussion for a joint meeting with the city of Aspen in May. And we don't have an awful lot to talk about, I guess, yet.
Yeah, and thank you. I will, apologize. I did not really have a chance to catch up with my counterpart at the city of Aspen. And Greg, I don't know if you've had any conversations with Mayor Tory.
I think they just got back yesterday.
Yeah, so we could have, if the board finds it useful, we could spend a little bit of time talking about proposed topics, or we could see if we're going to be really ready for a conversation.
Great, thanks.
Great.
I wanted to throw out from the outset, and then I'll move around. The thing that's been on my mind lately are the two topics, and they were actually alerted to me by city councilmen, were the ubiquity of the gas heaters around town that are kind of a fallout after COVID, when people put out their safe outdoor spaces to expand restaurants to allow them to seat the normal number of clientele. They want to keep all that, and they have been keeping it. I understand that the Après Ski Bar at the base of Aspen, whose name I forget, the Italian name place, goes through about 20 bottles of gas a day on their gas heaters, is what the crew there had told John Doyle. And so I'd like to propose to them that we work on solutions. There are electric radiant heaters. Raft uses them in all their bus stops. That might be a solution. As we're talking about electrification, I'm compelled to weigh in on it as a citizen, but I'm not sure where we stand and how many county entities would be part of that. Along the same lines, our hotel fleets, we have a lot of hotel van and bus, short-range van and livery vehicles for the hotels that often remain idling when they're waiting for a fare or waiting for a ride. I would like to talk to the city about incentivizing the community to electrify those vehicles, because it seems like a perfect use of an electric vehicle. Short range, plenty of opportunities to recharge, reliability. We know that's been proven. There actually are some in the community, so we know it works. And I'd like to have a discussion about how could we all work together to electrify that part of our transportation fleet. So those are two topics that I would put on. Maybe it's just me out there banging my own drum, but I wanted to bring it up with the board.
I want to add to your first, though, that you brought up about the gas heaters. It's the gas amenities in front of like the Molly,
That don't
and
do any heating.
Snowmass in front of by the ice skating rink was 40, 50 degrees out, and they had 4 burning gas, fire pits. And there was nobody there, and it was hot. And I'm like, that was so unnecessary, because nobody was toasting marshmallows and nobody was cold.
It's just a
So
visual
and
thing.
that's in Snowmass. It's just an amenity like a pond at your house up Castle Creek. So I think that should be added to the conversation. But I have others, but I think Kelly's gonna.
Well, no, I just was going to react. I just wonder if this is something for CORE's advocacy, like maybe to the Commercial Core Lodging Board.
For them to bring back to City Council.
It just seems like that would be like a direct point of advocacy for.
Address.
They're the ones, the
sure
membership
they
of
would-
all the lodging
They would probably love to be
memberships
part
and
of
restaurants and all that
City's
stuff.
appointed board.
Yeah.
And
That's-
ACRA's involved in that too, so maybe that's a better way to start, and then,
I mean, I want to spend more time with the city, like talking about the entrance and housing, like
Okay.
big picture
it. Important topics.
stuff. Not that that's not important. I wonder if CORE is a more effective vehicle.
We can run, I'll
But
run
that-
it by
anyway.
him. I'll run it by court, our next meeting.
Yeah, and we should reach out to the city's downtown group. But I had two other things. And Kelly, you had brought this up. We wanted to see if there was an update on their inspection of the Castle Creek Bridge that they did recently. Because with our meeting the other day with Pete, he said, because I knew the city had done their own and we never heard anything about that. And I think that was something that we were concerned about.
Well, and I see then I think one of their meetings next week, they're talking about Castle Creek Bridge
Yeah.
options.
Yeah, well, I was wondering what their inspection showed up. And I know the city has a mandated food composting program for commercial, and they were going to expand that to residential. Would like to know the status of that and and if they are, or will they be willing to work with the county as to accommodating the growth in that at our landfill.
And I think some of those discussions have been happening at the staff level.
But it might be nice for us to know what's going on. But those are just topics I had. Thanks. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, certainly. Francie or Steve? Francie, why don't you go? Nothing? Nothing there for, okay. Regarding conversations with the city, Steve?
Yeah, nothing that hasn't been mentioned already.
That's probably a full day's meeting.
Yeah,
already.
if we have a meeting
That's
at
a
all,
full,
right?
That's a full plate. We could just stop there. If that works. I'm sure other things will come up. We don't know when that meeting will be, but I'll give Tori a call. I understand that they went to Queenstown with sister cities or Accra, and it'll be interesting to see what they learned.
Gosh, how do I get that gig?
It's not a hard one to get.
Tori said it took them longer to fly over there than the meetings they had. to
Right,
fly
yeah.
back. This is-
We've already done open discussion. I don't know if there's anything else. Boy, oh boy. We're going to see that Mine Springs has been delayed, as you said. We've approved the letter for Charlotte. I think that's it, folks. I'm going to adjourn this meeting. And
Okay,
thank
see you
you all.
guys
We're
tomorrow.
out at 2:36. I appreciate the conversation.